around that time at a friend's house and exposed to some mature adult content, I felt this rush of both secrecy and shame. The secrecy of, I can't tell my parents about this or they'd be disappointed. They probably wouldn't let me come to this friend's house. And the shame of, something in me liked that and wants to see more.
The shame was immediate, but also that kind of visceral awakening of something that should have never, ever even come close to happening at that early in life.
And I was in that never again binge purge cycle for really the next 15 years of my life. A pattern that I took into Bible college as I was training for pastoral ministry, and then ultimately took into my marriage.
A person can go to seminary, they can train for ministry, and they can become really good. You use the word professional Christians, but it doesn't mean that there's not a pocket of real immaturity in their life where this other thing is thriving.
I don't want to have to go through that work. I don't want it to become public. I just want to fix it by myself. Only what I didn't realize is that I had been trying for 15 years to fix it by myself. What does it mean to be a sexual being that understands how to navigate my sexual feelings and desires in a God-honoring way? That's about growth and maturity.
Just recently, where someone told me that as a youth pastor, they went to a senior pastor and they were really wrestling with a pornography issue. There was this big struggle, and they were involved in church, but they're going, getting involved in getting prepared for ministry and going on to Bible college, etc. So now they're working at a church. They're going and looking for help from the pastor, and immediately they were fired.
We asked people the question, who would you feel comfortable going to and talking about a personal struggle with pornography? The number one answer was a counselor. The number two answer was their doctor, which is interesting because a counselor and the doctor have two things in common: that you pay for their services, and as you walk in the door, it's 100% confidential.
Welcome to the Love and Truth Network podcast, your guide for hope and healing in a hurting world searching for truth. Here we explore God's extraordinary design for biblical sexuality, identity, and authentic community. You'll be impacted by incredible stories of transformation, practical wisdom from pastors and counselors, and the power of God's grace that changes lives.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. We're really glad that you're here today. I hope that if you've been tuning in the past, these episodes have been encouraging to you and also challenging where they need to be. And I believe today is going to be another one of those podcasts where you can expect to be both encouraged and hopefully challenged if you need some forward movement and encouragement, maybe to move from one place to another. Maybe God's been pointing some things out to you and you've not been, as I in the past have sometimes have kind of been difficult for God to pry off the mark. But I hope that today's podcast will be something that will both encourage you and also help move you forward in your walk with Jesus. So Nick Stumbo is with us today. He's the executive director of Pure Desire Ministries. We're so grateful to have him. Nick and I connected quite a few years ago when I was doing another project, and he did an interview with me for that particular project, but he's not been on our podcast before. And so I'm really happy, Nick, for you to join us today. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for continuing to have these vital conversations. Our world needs more of that.
Yes, it does. And you're so welcome. So our audience, Nick, is just used to our guests just launching off and kind of beginning their story and sharing, kind of the depth of where God found them and also what he's been doing in your life.
Yeah. Well, kind of the overview of my story. I grew up in a pastor's home in the Midwest and have what I would call a very good upbringing. Mm-hmm. But in our home, as in so many Christian homes, we did not have the language or the context to really talk about sexuality. My dad had the birds and the bees talk with me when I was in the fourth grade, I was very naive at that point. It was very eye-opening. But that was the last time I remember discussing sexuality in the home. And so when I was around that time at a friend's house and exposed to some mature adult content, I felt this rush of both secrecy and shame. The secrecy of, I can't tell my parents about this or they'd be disappointed. They probably wouldn't let me come to this friend's house. And the shame of, something in me liked that and wants to see more. And planting that idea from that moment that maybe there's something wrong with me and wrong with my sexuality, because I believed it was wrong. Believed what the Bible said about sin and righteousness, and yet I knew in my heart I really liked what I was seeing. And because of that secretive, shameful nature, it made it easy to continue in a world of lust and fantasy, and then finding access to material. First of all, in lingerie catalogs or the section in the Sears catalog, and then finding ways to purchase or even shoplift magazines as a teenager so that I could get that fix, that rush of dopamine and the feel good chemicals. And every time for me, even as a young teen, was going to be the last time because I believed it was wrong. I would excuse it to curiosity, or I just, I got that out of my system, and now I know what the other guys on my football team are talking about. But never again, Lord. That was the last time. And I was in that never again binge purge cycle for really the next 15 years of my life. A pattern that I took into Bible college as I was training for pastoral ministry, and then ultimately took into my marriage. And I like to be clear as I share my story that this whole time, I would say I was both passionately in love with Jesus, sincerely wanting to follow and serve him, and continuing to fall back into this pattern. And I feel that I was trying everything that my Christian tradition had taught me to do. I knew the right Bible verses and the right prayers. I was inviting accountability as best I knew how to. And I was engaging in confession, believing that James chapter 5, confess your sins one to another and you will be healed, that was the pathway out. And so I remember, probably at about 16, confessing to my youth pastor after group one night and thinking, okay, finally, I got it out there. I told someone, now I'm going to be free. Only that lasted maybe a few days or a few weeks, and I stumbled back into pornography. And now there was the double guilt, the double shame of not only what I was doing, but that the person I had told about it didn't know that I had gone back to it. Right. And that just became a further part of the binge purge cycle. And in my marriage, that desire for confession and for freedom was a very early part of our marriage, that I told my wife, this is something I struggle with, but it's not about you. It's not your fault. It's something I've dealt with since I'm young, and I'm almost free of it. This was the last time. Only in marriage, it wasn't the last time either, as so many have found. Having a great wife, and we had a wonderful relationship. I would say, in all the ways we could, we had a great marriage. It's not like I had a terrible marriage and I was going to this other outlet. No, these things were happening simultaneously, which greatly increased the shame and the confusion of how could I be doing this? God's given me a wonderful wife, great kids. If you'd have seen my life as a 31-year-old from the outside, you would have thought everything was perfect. Beautiful wife, 3 thriving young children, a church that was growing every year. I was a successful high school cross-country coach. I had it dialed in externally, but internally I was dying from the weight of this sin and this pattern that it felt like no matter what I tried, I would end up back there eventually. And it was at the point our marriage had really come to that breaking point where my wife said, Nick, it's not that I hate you, but I hate the way this makes me feel. And because I don't know if it's ever going to stop, after 10 years, her confidence that I was ever going to really change was gone, and appropriately so. She said, because I don't know if it's ever going to stop, I don't know if I can stay around for all the pain. And, that was scary to hear, your wife saying that. And I'm trying everything I know to be free, but I'm on the verge of losing my wife and my kids. And with that, the only job that I've been trained for, because usually if the pastor's wife leaves him over pornography, he doesn't get to be the pastor anymore.
Yep. Right.
So everything is on the line. And yet still, all I know to do is build that wall of separation higher guardrails. Don't watch TV alone. Get rid of my cell phone. Keep the big bad internet away, and maybe I can, string it along long enough to fix this. Only I knew that nothing on the inside had changed. And that's the problem with that approach, is if we don't really address what's driving the behavior on the inside, I lived in this fear that I was only a moment away from being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong opportunities, and I would act out again. And I was terrified of that. And so we just kept moving forward. And it was in that season of the white knuckling it, the high walls of boundaries, that I first heard about Pure Desire Ministries. I was at a conference for pastors, and Ted Roberts had been invited to come in and speak. And he preached this great sermon from the book of Hosea, only he really flipped the script for what I knew of it. And
Ted is the founder of Pure Desire Ministries, just to be clear.
And the author of the book Pure Desire that came out in the late 90s. And I've typically thought of the book of Hosea in the Bible as our call to go and love the unlovable, to redeem people like Hosea does. But Ted made it clear that in this story, we're meant to see ourselves as the Gomer, that God has lavished his love on us, brought us into his home, and yet we continue to run to former lovers. And it is God in his goodness and grace that finds us and continues to bring us back and to cover our shame. And he said, and that's God's heart towards pastors who are struggling with pornography. And at the end of that sermon, our district leadership got up and said, we have a pathway for pastors who are struggling with internet pornography. We want to get you help. We want to work with your elders to keep you in ministry, and we want to pay for a good chunk of the process. And it felt like they were rolling out the red carpet just for me in the situation that I was in. And you would think that I would have been, the first one down the aisle, like, sign me up. This is what I've been waiting for. But I was so stuck in my own patterns of minimizing and rationalizing and denying that I really had a problem that I was ready to pass it by. Because I thought, I hope the men in this room who are really struggling are listening. Because I, quote unquote, only struggled once in a while. And it had been a couple of months at that point of white knuckling it. So I'm like, I think I'm good. I've got a plan. But boy, those men who are looking at porn like daily or going to the hardcore stuff, because that's not me, they need this program. And I was ready to just walk away from it. But by God's grace, I was not at that meeting alone. My wife had been able to attend with me, which I still don't recall why that was, because we had 3 little kids at the time and she rarely could come to the conferences with me. But she was sitting there. And while I was hearing all of the reasons not to, my wife was hearing the answer to 10 years of prayers, saying, Lord, would you show Nick a path to freedom? Because she believed I desired it, but that I didn't know that way. And for the first time, someone said, we understand a pathway to freedom. And so I was getting the proverbial elbow in the ribs. You're going to go talk to them, right? You're going to go talk to them, right? Yeah. And my thought was, well, I guess I am now, because I wanted to make her happy. I wanted to save the marriage. And I always share that part of the story because here I am now, the executive director of the ministry that saved our marriage. But my entry point was just as unwilling, just as dragging my feet as maybe some listeners feel right now of, I don't want to have to go through that work. I don't want it to become public. Like, I just want to fix it by myself.
Yeah.
Only what I didn't realize is that I had been trying for 15 years to fix it by myself without success. And it wasn't until we got involved in a Pure Desire group, both group for myself as the one who struggled and my wife for the one who is dealing with the betrayal, and started meeting regularly with counselors at the Pure Desire team, that our story really began to shift. Because it took me out of simply trying to manage and stop the behavior to go much, much deeper into looking at the why question of why do I reach out for this? And how had that pattern become ingrained in my brain and in my ways of thinking that made it very, very difficult to stop on my own. And I don't mean that as an excuse, like, oh, I can't help it. No, I mean, I had to face the severity of what I was stuck in and the level of help that I was going to need to get out of it, that I couldn't do this by myself. And it was in that year of counseling and being in groups that there were all of these aha moments that I discovered that pornography wasn't actually my problem. That pornography was the symptom of the deeper challenges I had with finding my value and success and my worth and my identity in performance. And so in all the places where performance and success can never be enough, pornography was a false substitute that I was reaching out to, where I would get lost in the fantasy that made me for a moment feel good. And my brain would remember those feel-good moments, and the guilt and shame weren't enough to keep me from going back. And that year for us of the counseling and groups was really transformational, of our marriage, of my behaviors, and ultimately led to me sharing my story with the entire congregation, which was a major step, and done with Dr. Ted's direction and encouragement, with my district leadership that were aware of the healing process we'd gone through. And in sharing my story of transformation, it really opened the door for the first time for people in the church to say, if Nick can face his issues and still be our pastor, I think it might actually be safe for me to own my problems and my struggles. And so we launched Pure Desire groups for men and for women. And over the next 5 years, really watched that become the most significant discipleship ministry in our church. Because people were really going beyond, like I said, behavior management to really dealing with the deep issues that were leading to their challenges. And as men and women were getting healthy and free, that's where we were getting all of our new volunteers and small group leaders and worship leaders, and even the next several staff members that I hired were men and women who had experienced change in a pure desire group. And so that transformation in our church was remarkable. And it really is what led to the ongoing connection with Pure Desire Ministries. And when our founder was diagnosed with Parkinson's and they needed to make a succession of leadership, they felt that I was the right fit. And that was 9 years ago now, in 2016, that I stepped out of traditional church ministry into leading Pure Desire. And so I'm very much the men's hair club kind of story that I'm not only the president, but I'm a member. I'm not only the executive director, but it's because it changed my life. And I feel like in so many ways, my job is just to tell people there's hope, there's a healing pathway. And if you're willing to lay down your pride and engage in community with others that are walking this road and get real about your whole story, not just, the what you did, but the whole why behind it, that lasting change really is possible. And we get to see that happen every day, every week, as we hear the stories of life change that continue to take place in Pure Desire groups and counseling. And so it really is a privilege to now see my story being lived out in so many other people's lives as well. And certainly not to say it's just because of my story, but I think as all of us share our stories, it lifts the lid of shame and secrecy on this topic, and it emboldens others to say, if you could experience that kind of hope, healing, and freedom, it's possible for me too, and gives them the courage to step into their own healing. And I'm just grateful to get to be a part of that for many, many others.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. I mean, I'm so grateful over and over again for the way that God has taken the ashes and the brokenness of my own life and the stuff that just felt like such garbage, like a dung heap. And while he doesn't love any of that, when we put it into his hands and we're willing to be broken open, it is a mystery to me how God can take that stuff and turn it around for something that gives him honor and glory, in the way that we magnify him for his willingness to come into our pit, but also give other people hope and even experience greater degrees of freedom ourselves as we share our stories. So yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Nick. I mean, you hit on so many things that you talked about the combination of that feeling, that intense feeling, and I had something similar of secrecy, but also shame. And I'd say for my early sexualization that happened when I was like 5 or 6, with pornography and also older boys' sexual behavior, that the shame was immediate, but also that kind of visceral awakening of something that should have never, ever even come close to happening at that early in life. But even later, I mean, still illicit sex of some kind or another, it does. We oftentimes have those confounding experiences of both shame and then something that feels really powerful that draws us back toward that. Talk a little bit more, if you would, just about the kind of the dynamic of that in your own life, perhaps, but also just in the that's a pretty common experience that people have.
Oh, absolutely. And I would echo that in my own story, that I had a friend, I would call him a friend at the time, who wanted to engage in some of those things like, watch me do this, let me touch you, you touch me, put our body parts together. And, I look back, it was all in that same realm of secrecy and shame. And I thought it was gross, and yet it didn't seem as gross as maybe I should have felt it was. And I certainly couldn't tell my parents, because then I can't play with that friend. And what I have found in now being a part of Pure Desire groups and leading hundreds of men through the group process is every single story starts before we're ready and before we know what to do with it. Like I have yet to have a man share that I was 8 years old and I really wanted to find pornography, or I really it's always, this was done to me, or this magazine was left under my dad's workbench and he didn't care that I had found it, or abusive situations, things that they were exposed. Like it awakens something in us. And when we don't have a context in our home, and it's why we do so much with parents to say, we need to equip you to be that safe place so that when that happens to your kids, because something's probably going to happen, and not that we want it to, or we're saying just let it happen, but we can't so perfectly parent our kids that nothing bad ever happens to them. But that in that moment when a friend says something inappropriate or they run across something online, they know mom and dad have told me about this, and they are the safest people in the world to go to. Because in the absence of that, we internalize a lot of thoughts, just like you said, about who we are, what sex is, what our body means. And what I find over and over in group and in my own story, those are the messages that stay with us because they're lived experiences. And one of the things most people don't know about the brain, the way God designed it, is we know quite a bit about the limbic system with fight, flight, or freeze, and how things that relate to our survival get sealed into the limbic brain so that we can respond to them quickly. But what many people don't know is that food and sex can have that same power in our limbic system.
Yep.
Because food and sex, if you think about it, are also both required for the survival of our species. And so God, in his wisdom, designed those things to be kind of core to our nature. But in a fallen world, sin and Satan can really easily hijack those systems. And so the experiences that we have as kids that start to define that inner message about our value or about what sex means or about what pleasure is, those are the things that many men and women are still responding to 20, 30, and 40 years later because no one has helped them revisit both the messages of those experiences and the experiences themselves and see that, like, oh, I wasn't a bad little kid. Like, I was curious or I wanted to keep a friend. And those are normal things for an 8, 9, 10-year-old to feel. And when my brain then got awakened to sexuality, it responded the way God designed the brain to respond. And when you start to unpack some of those things from our childhood, it can really release the burden of shame and secrecy, but also the messages that got tucked into our thinking with them, so that then we can learn to really think differently about ourselves, about our bodies, about sex, about God. There's just so much that's tucked into those messages. And when we have the safe place and supportive environment to actually talk those things through, and I would add, we hear others doing the same thing.
Yeah.
That's where we have the new experiences of friendship, the new experiences of love that are not, sexualized or shame-filled, that actually become powerful enough to rewrite those messages from our past. So
Yes.
I would affirm what you're sharing, and what anyone listening is probably thinking about if they go back to their story. One of the most powerful questions we ask is, when were you first exposed to pornography or to sexuality? And every time in those stories is tucked so much of the seeds of their struggle. And when we can understand where those seeds started growing, then, like I said, we get the tools to really remove the weeds and see God's healthy life grow in us in whole new ways.
Yep. Well, and you actually have a real concern for parents. You've mentioned that, and we also do as well. I mean, we have a summit that's a half-day summit called Parenting to Thrive, and the two big places that we focus on in that summit is on prevention for young parents, or even people. We would love to have people come who aren't even parents yet, but just want to learn, especially men. And then we have a section on recovery, basically as a parent for a teenager or even an adult child. How can we best kind of position ourselves in our own relationships with God, making sure that those are healthy? So many times parents are trying to help kids when their own relationships and their own spiritual health is really lacking as well, or their marriage is suffering. And so, but on that prevention side, one of the things that I find, and you've talked about it as well, but I'd love for our listeners or viewers to think about this for themselves, that none of us are raised in perfect homes. Obviously, that just doesn't happen. We don't have perfect parents. Children aren't perfect either. But I do feel like even in the best of homes, many times when moms and dads especially, when we don't have a view toward more than behavior management, when we don't have a view toward more than training the intellect of a child in memorizing scripture and reading their Bibles, and all those things are important, but rather this concept of really shepherding the heart of a child, of really understanding what's happening on the inside of a child's heart, drawing those things out. One of our dear ministry friends, her name is Katie Fowl. She's actually up in your neck of the woods. She's leads an organization called Them Before Us. She's up in Seattle, and one of the things she's written about in one of her books is parents have to get to their children first, and but it also needs to be. It needs to be an ongoing conversation. It needs to be this, again, shepherding the heart of a child. And so I think one of the things that makes children so susceptible is when we have deep longing and need for love and affection. And sometimes we receive that differently depending on our personality and that kind of thing. But when we're pretty empty, even as children, in terms of nurture, care. We don't have much of an overflow of emotional needs being met. These things become incredibly sexual things. Pornography, those become incredibly attractive and alluring. They're going to be in some ways anyway, but when we're empty, I feel like they're even more powerful in drawing us in. What I know that's a lot that I just kind of threw out there, but what are your thoughts about those ideas?
When I think of parents, I think a reality or a truth there is that we will parent out of what we know and what we've experienced. And so
Yes.
many of us, not to fault our parents, we can both honor their role and be honest about how we were raised.
Yeah.
Our parents kind of were raised in an era where you didn't talk about sexuality. And if it came up, we did often use punishment and shame to try to scare people away from something. And so my experience, like many others, if something sexual came up, our parents' reaction would be like, don't you dare do that. Or, if that ever
Yes.
happened, you'd get grounded for a month. And it may be coming from a parent from a very good place of, I'm trying to scare you away from it. But what we don't realize is that it's actually reinforcing both the shame message of, man, if you like this or do this, there's really something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And the secrecy message of, well, if I do something or something happens to me, I better not tell my parents because I don't want to get in trouble. And that's human nature as kids. We don't want to
Yes.
get in trouble. So if we perceive that it creates anger and punishment from parents, then we keep it to ourselves. Only that's the very environment in which this entire struggle thrives and flourishes. And so instead, what we try to talk so much with parents on is two things. One, you probably won't create greater health in your home than you're experiencing personally.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are locked in some sort of binge purge struggle still yourself, your healing and freedom is the greatest gift you will ever give to your kids. And
So
if you want to
true.
create healthy sexuality in them, start with yourself. Because what we notice happens is if you're getting healthy, you can't help but speak out of what you know and have experienced. Like I said at the beginning, we parent out of what we know and have experienced. And if all we experienced from our parents was silence and punishment, then we're probably not going to be very adept at responding differently until we face our own story, our negative sexual history. And as we find freedom and growth and change, we're going to parent differently. So that's one of the things
Mm-hmm.
we talk about is dealing with your stuff is about so much more than you. It's about equipping your kids to take that journey into health sooner. But then the second thing I emphasize a lot is what does it look like for you as a parent to position yourself in that role of helper and advocate and guide for your children? And so we get that same kind of feedback you do of parents say, I don't want to expose them to something too early, or what if they're not ready or they're too young? I'll always say somebody will be the first person to tell
Yes.
your kids about sex. Do you want it to be a Hollywood movie or something online? Or what if it's you? And if it's you and you're doing it in a helpful way, their heart and mind receive it differently. And what I have found is if the kid isn't emotionally or mentally ready for a level, it just kind of goes over their head. Because a safe person, a mom or a dad who loves them, is maybe telling them about their body or other people's bodies or explaining this thing called sex. And they're using anatomically correct words and terms. And if
Mm-hmm.
their brain's not ready, it's like, oh, okay, no, because they're not conditioned by shame yet. They're not
Yes.
conditioned by fear yet. Maybe we are, and we say the word, penis out loud, and we feel like, I can't believe I just
Right.
said that, because to
Right.
us, it's like shameful or it's a bad word. If our
Mhm.
kid hears it from us and they're 5, they just learn, oh, that's what that body part is called.
Yep.
And mom and dad talk about it. And if we continue to play that role of, one of the most powerful things I found, I have 4 kids now. My boys are 16 and 13. It's just powerful asking questions. So when they were 6, 7, 8, and 9, at least once a month, I was trying to say, hey, have any of your friends at school been saying jokes that you don't understand? And sometimes my boys they would be totally different than I expected. They'd be non-sexual jokes, and we'd have very interesting conversations about what this joke meant. But it also is a way for them to bring up, like, well, I heard this word. And
Yep.
like, oh, I'm glad we can talk about that. And, and rather than saying, well, shame on you for, where did you hear that word?
Yes.
It's like, oh, that's interesting. Why, in what context did that come up in? Because sometimes, like, the kid using the word didn't even know the context. They were just throwing out some adult phrase they had learned or heard at home, and they're using it at school maybe to feel cool. but they don't know what it is either. And I've had a few of
Mhm.
those with my boys in particular, where they bring up a term or a phrase or a sexual innuendo, and I'll explain in appropriate age appropriate terms, not being overly graphic or crass, but just,
Yeah.
this is what that means. This is when a man does this to a woman, or this is a woman's body part, or and sometimes to see their faces of like, that's what that means,
Right, right.
several times they said, my friends don't know that's what that means. It's like, well, I think it's good that we know, because that's a important word that we're using there. But in those conversations of asking questions and being their ally, it creates that environment as they grow, that they know mom and dad understand this area and they're safe to come to, and they're here to help me,
Yes.
not to hurt me. They're here to guide me, not to punish me. And I'm not suggesting that there should never be consequences, or if your teen is acting out on their cell phone in their bedroom, you need to take the phone away for a
Yeah.
time at least, or you need to make sure the phone isn't with them in alone in the bedroom. Like, natural
That's kind of the
logical
good rule,
consequences
generally speaking, anyway. The
are
no
good
phone
to
in the
do,
bedroom.
but it's still that spirit of, I'm here to help you. And
Yes.
that starts at a very young age. And I think the ways that we can do that are easier than most parents expect. And if you're hearing this, be like, man, my kids are already older, I waited too long. I always say, well, start now. Whatever age
Yeah.
they're at, just start to say, hey, I know we
Right.
haven't talked about this much, but I want you to know I'm a safe person and I'm here to help you. And I know how difficult this can be when you feel like you can't talk to anyone. And just
Yeah.
starting that conversation with your kids could be life giving for them.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think even I have talked to dads, I've talked to moms who do feel like, okay, my kids are all in their 20s. Some of them are in their 30s, and yet, even though they grew up in a Christian home and had all these great biblical teaching and all that kind of stuff, I find over and over again that so many times, again, the kids are getting a lot of content and information, but there's no real formation or shepherding of the heart, even in Christian homes, or there's very little of that. But even when that's been missed, I encourage dads, just as you said, I encourage dads and moms to sit down, to see if they can sit down with their adult children, and even say, maybe it's appropriate, depending on the situation, to say, I feel like I really need to ask your forgiveness for something. Like I'm getting some things or understanding some things now that I wish I had known 10 years ago or 15 years ago, or I
Yeah.
wish I'd leaned into a little bit more. And kind of taking that low ground can, I think, open up some dialogue, and like in saying to an adult child, I wish that I had been more engaged with you in some of the struggles that are so common. I wish I'd engaged in a long conversation with you. I mean, a conversation over the course of time with you about sexuality or things of that nature. I didn't have that in my own life. I didn't know how to do that quite in your life. I mean, whatever it is, I just think that it's never too late to go back and acknowledge where we blew it, as parents. And of course, we have to also brace ourselves. Sometimes kids are in a place, adult children are in a place where they kind of are thinking everything's your fault. And sometimes they'll turn around and dump all kinds of things on you as a mom or dad that aren't yours at all, really, that it's kind of their own stuff. But I think it's good to own what we can and try to open up those lines of communication wherever possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
remember,
true.
Nick, when you and I did an interview, probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now, that and I often show this when I'm doing a conference in different settings. But you and I were talking about, it reminds me what you mentioned earlier in your testimony about really, you used the word both in relationship to the idea that you had a real love for Jesus. You had a desire to grow in your faith. And yet you also had this other part of your life where pornography was just wreaking havoc, in your life. And I remember in our earlier interview, you talked about how a person can go to seminary, they can train for ministry, and they can become really good. You use the word professional Christians, but it doesn't mean that there's not a pocket of real immaturity in their life where this other thing is thriving. Can you just talk about that concept? Because I think so many people don't understand, how in the world can I possibly even be a Christian and have these kinds of struggles, in my life?
Yeah. If you think about our growth in following Christ, we all know there are places that are not yet fully redeemed or as redeemed as they could be. And maybe one struggles with anger. Someone says, well, my issue is more with food and overeating. Someone else, it's greed. We all have
Yeah.
issues. And I think that the struggle we have as Christians is we often put sexuality in like its own unique, different category. It's like, well, all these other sins are kind of like, it's okay to be growing in those areas, but in this area, like this should be a just stop it, don't do it. And if you love Jesus, you wouldn't. But what we miss is some of the things I have shared about the brain, the way our brain is wired, hardwired by God to pursue pleasure. Your desire for pleasure is not because you're a sinner. It's because God gave us this incredible capacity for beauty and joy and laughter and sexual pleasure, which, by the way, let's remember, who invented sex?
Yep.
Who invented our body parts? As one of my coworkers likes to say, who invented the penis to have a large concentration of pleasure sensory cells there at the head of the penis? Like, that's not Satan's idea. God created us that way, and his creation is good. And so if we can realize, like, boy, this sexuality is wired into my body, and in it's a part of me that needs to mature and grow, just like my emotions, my will, my eating habit, like I need to be discipled. Then we can see the truth that almost none of us were actively discipled in the area of our sexuality.
Right.
And if you said to someone, what if, think of a hypothetical, what if no one in your life, no one in our world or society ever gave you healthy advice on what eating should be, the kind of calories to consume, how much to eat? How effective do you think you would be at from age 2 to now? You've never heard, what does it look like to eat well and be a healthy human being? Like, you'd say, well, that person would probably be a wreck. And it's unthinkable that parents wouldn't guide to eat this, don't eat that. No, you can't have 18 cookies right before bed. No, we don't drink a liter of Mountain Dew for breakfast. Like that's just like human nature. We're training our kids, and to differing degrees, obviously, but we're training them for health. Well, flip that story into the sexuality realm. Most of us from age 2 to now had little to no instruction about healthy sexuality other than like human anatomy at school and the birds and the bees. But like, what does it mean to be a sexual being that understands how to navigate my sexual feelings and desires in a God-honoring way? That's about growth and maturity. And if we can see that perspective versus it just being this, well, shame on you, you're a bad person because you want these things, versus seeing maybe it's that in this area of my life, I'm just still very immature and undisciplined and undiscipled, then I think it gives us more freedom to reach out for help and to say to others, would you help me grow in an area of my life where I'm still in need? I still need to mature. And recognizing we don't have many opportunities to do that. That's what we're trying to do in Pure Desire groups and in podcasts like this, is create spaces where we learn and grow and see a better way to do life that is incorporated in our growth and our faith. And it's not this either or of like, well, either I love Jesus or I love porn. It's like, well, I love Jesus and I love, sugar. And sometimes I eat probably way too much sugar, but that doesn't mean I don't love Jesus. And everyone in the church, I think, would get that one and be like, well, yeah, we all eat too much sugar sometimes. Well, it's very much the same brain process if I say, and my brain really likes porn. Now, we feel like, well, that's somehow like, well, that's unspiritual. And I get it's sin and it's wrong. Just like I believe overeating food is sin in that sense. But there's a way my brain is wired to like and enjoy that. And that wiring goes all the way back to my creation. And so if we can see that perspective of like, man, God's the author of our joy, God's the author of our bodies, God's the author of our sexuality, how can we train and disciple people to live out the goodness of that intention versus shaming them because they're not perfect? I think we'll see a lot more growth and success in churches addressing this topic, because it won't be, the big taboo elephant in the room no one knows how to address. I've said to churches, this should just be one of the many ways we are helping people become more like Christ, that we need to honor him in our bodies and our minds and our sexuality. It's all a journey and we're all on it somewhere. And so let's not act like it's a uniquely bad thing if we're not as far along as we'd like to be.
Yeah. I think that's such a good word. And also to come back to some of your own story a little bit, I love how, as you were on this journey, as you began to break free, as you began to experience more freedom, and with the blessing of leadership and all of that district wise, as well as within your own church, that you opened up this story to your congregation. And so again, really exemplifying what it means to walk in the light and I think the statement about leaders need to go first in a lot of different ways, right? So I've also heard stories, and I know you have too, I'm sure, where I think of one even just recently where someone told me that as a youth pastor, they went to a senior pastor and they were really wrestling with a pornography issue. Sometimes they'd have real freedom in it, but it had started when they had found their, I think, uncle's pornography when they were 12 years old or 11 years old or something. And from then on, there was this big struggle, and they were involved in church, but they're going, getting involved in getting prepared for ministry and going on to Bible college, etc. So now they're working at a church. They're going and looking for help from the pastor, and immediately they were fired. And I just heard another story of a similar situation. I hear these often, and I feel two things in that situation. I feel grieved for that person, but I also feel even more grieved for the entire congregation who could have had an experience of seeing somebody get the help that they were pursuing, and see the entire DNA of that church impacted for the positive by the way this could have been lived out in a way that they could have really paved a way for so many others in that church to come clean about their own struggles as well. So there's that perspective. But then there's also, I've known of pastors who, whether it's pornography or other sexual sin or whatever, where they didn't come themselves, they were actually caught, and I think even then there could be a genuine attitude of repentance, like, oh, this is horrible, and I'm going to not do justice to the way I'm saying this, but this is awful. I've been wanting help for a long time, and there really is a sense of kind of relief that it's finally exposed, and shame also, and all of that. But there are also others who are still entrenched, and they're like, they don't really want to change. They might go through the boohooing and the tears or whatever that initially that it was found out. But I think that I just want to speak to those who are listening, who are hearing your story and how God used that in your church. There are definitely times that I've seen where pastors need to step aside or be removed for a period of time, or maybe even be removed, indefinitely, because of their sexual sin patterns. Can you speak to? There's no hard line that we can say, oh, when this happens, then this is the result. It's not a formula, but can you kind of speak to that? That it's not everyone that can stay in that role and walk this out. Sometimes people do need to step out of that.
Yeah. Hold on one quick second. My light turned off because I haven't moved enough.
Oh, okay.
I have to get up. There we go. It knows I'm still here. Okay.
If you were charismatic, you'd be waving your hands every now and then or something. But yeah, there you go.
Yes, every church has to decide what level of sin is permissible for a pastor to remain a pastor, because the truth is every single pastor out there is a sinner.
Yes.
I know we don't like to talk about that, but none of us are perfect. Mm-hmm. We all have levels of discipleship and maturity that we're walking through. And a church or denomination does need to decide, what do we feel is the acceptable bar, that if you cross certain lines, we need to take action. And I do think that's appropriate in many circumstances. What I think is unfortunate in the area of sexuality is that we tend to create a bar with no option or opportunity for help. Yes. And so we expect a standard that you're hired as a pastor, and we just assume that you can meet the standard. And if we find out you don't, we get rid of you. And again, there may be levels of behavior that we would all say, well, yeah, there are standards we need to have, but there are also a whole lot of pastors out there who would like to get help, but they fear that if they acknowledge any kind of standard less than perfection, they could lose their job, their career, their ministry. And so I try to say to people in positions of making decisions, setting culture in their church, policy in their denomination, put the bar wherever you think is appropriate. But you'd better offer opportunities for help and growth and change. I mean, when a young man or woman gets hired in ministry, we know, like, hey, there's going to be a growth curve here of you learning to lead meetings or preach better, or if you've never coordinated a whole worship service, there might be some growth curve there. But why do we assume that in their sexuality they're fully formed and they don't need any help there? I'd love to see churches walk alongside someone and say, we know that you're a pastor because you're called to be, but we also know that didn't immediately make you perfect. And so in the areas where you're not yet perfect, which is all of us, we'd like to be a part of helping you grow and not expect you to go do that by yourself, because we know even though you're our pastor, you're still a human being. And as a human, we want to help you grow and thrive and not have to lose you because something grows to the point that now it is an unavoidable kind of mess that we're in. So I say that. And for many that maybe feel like I'm in a situation where, hey, if I raised my hand and said I struggle with porn, I'm going to lose my job and I can't afford to lose my job. There are many steps that you can take before you go public. That's why we have online groups at Pure Desire. We have numerous people in full-time ministry that are in a group receiving help, actually getting to be totally honest in a confidential environment, who would say, my organization doesn't know I'm here, because if they did, I don't think I could be in that organization anymore. And I always say to that person, kudos for you for realizing you need help. And even if you can't ask for it publicly, you're doing what you can. I think, unfortunately, too many people stay stuck in those situations because, like, well, if I ask for help, I'll lose my job. And yet you could confidentially start counseling, get in a group. You could be a part of seeing transformation happen outside of your church if you're not in a safe culture to actually raise your hand and say, I need help. Now, I hope our culture shifts. I hope we offer more support and help to people even in ministry. But until then, I know that's the reality of our world. And if you're in that situation, you may need to begin pursuing help privately. And there are many organizations like ours that are here to say, we can help you. And really, it'll make a huge, huge difference in your ministry if you would take those steps towards health.
Well, and I've heard, just to highlight a little bit what you're saying too, I've heard from a number of pastors and Christian leaders that they have sought out and found help at a Sexaholic Anonymous group, for example, a largely secular sexual addiction group of some kind. And they found far more openness and vulnerability, like drastically more openness and vulnerability, and actually safety for their own story in a group like that than any place they've ever been in the church. And so, making use of the groups that Pure Desire offers, and other groups out there. Desert Stream Ministries has an online group, Cross Current, a mini version of their Living Waters program. Their Living Waters program is off the hook. Wonderful, powerful. My wife and I were involved in that for probably 20 years. But love them, love what you guys are doing. But to me, it is incredibly tragic that Christian leaders feel like they have to go into the secular world to find a place they can be real and vulnerable, because the church can't or doesn't tolerate that. So we have to have some kind of a shift there to actually support to support one another, as opposed to just kicking those that are struggling to the curb.
Yeah, that sadly is an indictment against many of our churches, that people, pastors and congregants alike, would say, I feel safer taking this to a secular group than to my own church.
Yep.
Excuse me. And I think we need to look at that and say the church ought to be the safest place in the world to ask for help.
Yep.
Because we know we're all sinners. We know we're all in need of grace. We know that saying the Jesus prayer and inviting him into my life, as sincere it is, isn't a magic pill. Now, does Jesus miraculously set people free from things? Yes, and I'm thankful he does. But there are other times he asks us to walk a road of discipleship and transformation, whether in an eating issue or alcohol or sex and pornography. And if someone's on that journey, why would we ostracize them? If their heart is saying, I want to move towards Christ likeness, show me the way, like, that's what the church is here to do. And so we've said that a lot. Our mission is to try to help the church become the safest place in the world for people to go for help. And right now, honestly, it's not. We did some research with Barna last year and put out a report called Beyond the Porn Phenomenon. And in it, we asked people the question, who would you feel comfortable going to and talking about a personal struggle with pornography? The number one answer was a counselor. The number two answer was their doctor, which is interesting because a counselor and the doctor have two things in common, or they have things in common, that they are a professional, that you pay for their services, and as you walk in the door, it's 100% confidential, even protected by HIPAA law in our society. And that's where people feel like they could actually be honest, people that they're paying to listen to them be honest. But their pastor was like 9th or 10th on the list. And a very small minority of people said they would feel comfortable going to their pastor. And maybe you're a pastor that's listening and you are grace-filled and people would come to you right and left. I would just say in our culture, unfortunately, that's not the norm.
Yeah.
And yet it should be, because we are here to be the shepherd of the people of God. And if a sheep is saying, help me in this area, we ought to be a place of love and grace and care that moves them towards Christ likeness. And so I hope as we have conversations like this, we might begin to see some culture shift and
Yes.
churches that just say, man, if you struggle with this, woman, if you struggle with this, we are here for you. And here's a story of someone that we've helped. And guess what? We still love them. And they're a part of our team. And we didn't help them and then, black label them. They're a part of us. And we want you to experience healing too. And if that was happening in churches, if that could become the norm, if the person that when asked, who could you share about your struggle with pornography, if pastor or small group leader was the number one answer, we would see a mammoth shift in this struggle across our country, I believe.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that's so true. And you love the church. I love the church. We want to be a part of equipping the church and strengthening the church to do what the church is called to do. And it certainly is to be equipped in these vital areas of ministry, to one another. And the report you mentioned, the Barna report, like that was a huge report that you commissioned. Like this wasn't just some kind of minor thing. This was a big deal. What are some of the other kind of highlights from that report that people might not necessarily know about? And by the way, can people get access to this report through your website or through some other means?
Yeah, it's at puredesire.org. You can find the report there, and we feature it in a number of places. And it's still at the banner of our website. It's listed or on the store page. We really wanted to understand what's happening culturally and in the church in this area, particularly since the COVID pandemic and all of the cultural issues that are going on. It felt a little bit like the church's focus on pornography had become a little bit of been there, done that kind of attitude that, well, that was 10 years ago, that was a big focus. And now we're more focused on these present issues and wanting to know what is happening collectively in this area. And as you might expect, it was clear that collectively our struggle has continued to get worse. For the first time that I'm aware of, a major study found that a majority of Christians acknowledged that they view pornography. 54%, including men and women, would say that at some point they are viewing pornography, whether it's, their options were daily, a few times a week, once or twice a month, less often than that, or never. And so you have 54% of Christians marking something, and that's 75% of men, which we might expect, but it's also 40% of the women that say, hey, this is becoming an issue in my life. And when they ask some questions, follow-up of like, who is helping you in your struggle? Who is helping you overcome this? Over 80% of people said no one, that no one is helping me. And another question was asked, does anyone even know that you struggle with pornography or that you view pornography? And culturally, the whole survey found that 51% of people said no one knows. And there were all these options of my spouse, my friend, my family, my pastor, my counselor, an adult I don't even know is aware of my struggle. 51% said no one knows. And so you would think in the church, the people of God, where we are called to confession and honesty and to love one another, to bear one another's burdens, you would hope and expect that number to be much better, but it's only slightly better. 49% of Christians, self-identifying Christians that say they go to church regularly, their faith is important to them, 49% of them said no one even knows that this is a struggle for me. And to me, those are the kind of, put that together of a majority of us are struggling and a majority of us say, and no one knows and no one is helping. I think those two factors actually are overlapping, that is why so many people are struggling, because we don't have safe places and safe people where we can go to and get help. And that to me is really the place we would love to see change happen.
Yeah, I so agree. And I think I think I kind of said this earlier, but I just feel like this bears repeating over and over again, is I don't think that many churches have yet, or Christians within the Christian community, most of us know that pornography is an issue of some kind. I don't know that the majority of Christians would understand just how serious it is and how ubiquitous it is and how it's devouring our young people, but not just our young people, our adults as well. All of that's true. But in addition to that, for those that feel like, oh, this is a big issue and we've got to do something about it, we want to get equipped to help these people. But that's all true too. That's a good desire. But I think we miss the bigger picture of, wow, what would our churches look like? What would our communities look like if we could handle these issues with both confidence and joy? Knowing not joy that somebody's often, whatever the issue is, not joy in the sin, but joy in seeing people come to the table and drag their stuff out of the darkness into the light with a band of brothers, band of sisters, with a pastor, with a small group leader, whatever. That the ability for, again, when the tide comes in, all the boats rise. The value to the entire church. We're just missing. We're missing so much by sweeping this crap under the carpet. And then, and we've got these mountains like the size of Everest that our children are tripping over because we won't pull this crap out and actually look at it honestly. And sometimes the crap, yes, the sin of pornography, all that kind of stuff. Yes, that's sin. I'm not minimizing that. But in some ways, it's the resistance or the self-righteousness or I don't know, just kicking the can down the road. That in and of itself is also such a deeply sinful perspective that isn't helping set prisoners free.
It's so true. I always think of one of my favorite quotes by the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who in his little book, Life Together, says that though we have fellowship as the saints,
yes,
we don't yet know how to be together as sinners, as the undevout. And he says the reality is that we are sinners. And yet many Christians are unthinkably horrified when an actual sinner shows up in their midst. And I think that's a challenge in our theology, that we talk a lot about how Jesus has saved us from our sins and set us free from our sins. And that is true on a theoretical, theological, eternal level, that I have been forever set free from the consequence and the pain of my sins because Jesus paid it all on the cross. And the Bible says a lot about sanctification and laying down our sin and stripping it off and letting go of and carrying one another's burdens, because there's a recognition that even while I've been set free, I am still in the process of being set free. And
yes.
I think we might miss that in our Christianity, that we feel like if I acknowledge I'm still a sinner, maybe Jesus didn't save me. Maybe I haven't been set free. And we've got to do better at holding in tension those two things, that I have both been set free in an eternal, life-giving way that I could never accomplish on my own, and I am in the process of being set free by putting to death my old nature and its desires and learning to live in my new nature. It's sanctification. And I think if our churches could get more comfortable that our sexuality is deeply involved in our sanctification process, again, we would just see it as one of the many ways we need to grow in Christ. And I think you're spot on that it actually is a hidden evangelism opportunity, because I think in the world, we're already seeing the impact of this misaligned sexual ethic, anything goes,
yes,
make the body a commodity, the way it's leading to abuse and trafficking and damaging our children. And the society we're in is like waking up to go, wait a minute, something's wrong here. There's got to be a better way. And there is really an opportunity for the church to say there is, and we would love to help you find that way. Because as men and women experience the devastation of affairs and pornography addiction in their marriage, it doesn't matter if in that moment, if it's a Christian marriage, an atheist marriage, an agnostic marriage, if they need help and they hear of a place that's helping people actually be free, they'll show up. And I saw that in my church. People that would have said they were very nominal Christians or not Christian at all found hope in this area. And that is actually what opened them up to the gospel, because they had believed that if God or Christians knew about this sin in their life, they'd be kicked out. And when they found out they could actually bring this part of their life to God and to Christians and get help, it changed their entire attitude towards Christianity. And we saw people through that really come to faith in ways that I don't know would have happened any other way. And so just another element to think about when we engage in this topic, we might reach a lot further into people's lives than we expect.
Well, and I just think that the analogy of neither of us are minimizing the impact or the damage that these issues bring about. Again, there's a wide range of things. We're talking about sexuality, but there's lots of stuff outside of that as well, or sexual sin. But I think the one of the metaphors I love so much is thinking about the church. The church is the bride of Christ for sure. We often say that the church is also a second chance at family, but the church is also, I think, really meant to be a teaching hospital that we come and we receive. So often we receive help and support and people walking along, or the intention should be that we're being discipled, that people are walking alongside of us, that we don't have these compartments of darkness and closets in our lives that are off limits to those within the church, because there's love and care and support and competence and being able to help us through those. But when we think about being a teaching hospital or an ER, a MASH unit, kind of on the front lines, I think that really shifts the paradigm of what and helps us to I hate the phrase reimagine. That's all used in some crazy ways, but I think it does help us to kind of reimagine a little bit of what the church could be. And it's something I want to be a part of then. I mean, I want to be a part of the worship. I want to be a part of the preaching. I love how that helps recalibrate from the mess of the week or the things that I've kind of walked through, and helps me kind of recenter again a true north in my life toward Jesus. Those are all wonderful things, but I also want to be thinking about scrubbing up and sort of spiritually and emotionally and mentally getting ready to have eyes for others and coming to church on Sunday, that it's not just all about me. It's not whether it's my favorite song and whether it's, whatever. I just think that that's so much about the way the Lord wants to kind of direct his church to be prepared and ready and looking for those who are hurting around us. And some of those hurting have been sitting in the church for 30 years and silent, So yeah. So Nick, I've loved this conversation. I could talk to you for hours and hours at a time. But is there anything that's kind of on your heart that you wanted to say earlier, or that you feel impressed on right now that we haven't really covered, or something to kind of maybe put a finer point on something we've talked about as we wrap up here?
I guess what comes to mind as you ask that is the ways in which, because this area is shrouded in a lot of secrecy and shame, it feels really big. And it does. It devastates marriages. It ruins careers. It shipwrecks church communities. And because of all that, it can feel like this, scary monster that we're not equipped with. We better just stay away from it, even if it's our own story. When the truth is, recovery and change is more doable than we expect.
That's right.
It's learning to show up in a community, in a small group, a confidential place, to say, this is the truth of my story, and have people that go, we love you for sharing that, and we're here for you. And then being able to unpack, well, where did that start? Where did that first happen? There's so many tools and pieces that when people get into a group and they start to lean into this, like, oh, this isn't as crazy as I thought. There's not some, mind bending trick you need to learn to help people. It's creating spaces where it's okay to be honest. And then there's actually some plans and some tools to live differently, to walk in a new way. And I often quote that phrase, and I'm not sure who said it. It's maybe just proverbial wisdom in our society, but they said, don't let all the good you cannot do keep you from the good that you can do. And so maybe we're not sure how to solve broken marriages in our church, but we could begin to offer a group that says, hey, if this is an area you've ever struggled with, here's a safe, confidential place. Yep. We're inviting men, we're inviting women to come and be real. And you start that and realize, like, boy, it'd be great if they had some curriculum to go through, and like, hey, that's what Pure Desire is here for, is they've got small group curriculum for people to go through. And the curriculum is a guide. It just is a lot more doable. And so I think it's actually one of the enemy's tools. He's got two in particular. One is isolation, keep everybody separate, keep everybody stuck in their own sin, thinking they're the only one. Nobody else is like them. And yet we're all sitting together in a room feeling the same thing. And if it could all be totally known, we would be much more connected to one another than we realized. Like, oh, you too? I didn't know we were in the same boat. So isolation. But I think the other one the enemy uses is fear. Fear that if I address this, it'll get worse. Fear that it'll blow things up. Fear that if we start this in our church, it'll be too big to handle. And in the fear, we do nothing. And I think that's exactly what Satan wants, to say, it's too big, it's too messy, so do nothing. And I would say this can be scary and it can get messy. Therefore, do something. Tell someone, ask for help, find a group online. Go. What is a next step that you could take? And don't let the fact that you can't solve the whole problem all at once keep you from taking a step, because it's in the thousands of small steps that we all collectively take that we could see this begin to shift. And that might be in our church or our family or just in our own story. And so reach out, join that group, talk to that person, because otherwise fear and isolation will win the day. And the longer they win, I can tell you this, the stories that you've mentioned that I've seen, that we hear all the time in our culture, it always gets worse. In doing nothing, it always gets worse.
Yep,
and if we can start to do something, then we can invite God into new places that really can be life-changing. But we have to start by taking a step. And whatever that step is today, I pray God gives you the courage to take that one step, and that it leads to another and another and another until you are experiencing change and transformation, because we've gotten to see that happen all the time.
It's so good. I just am reminded, as you wrapped up there, how James in his letter says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. There is a way that God longs to. He's ready and willing. We need to sometimes just take a step toward him in doing that next thing. So as we wrap up, Nick, just share a little bit about the different groups that you have, that people who have particular kinds of needs could find help and support in, and then also some of your resources, and just once more, just your website.
Yeah, we have groups for men and for women, for men who struggle, for women who struggle, for women who've been betrayed, and material for college-age single men and women. You can find all those workbooks on our website at puredesire.org. But for men, it's 7 Pillars of Freedom. For women who struggle, it's Unraveled. And for women who have been betrayed, it's Betrayal and Beyond. For young adult men, a workbook's called Living Free. And young adult women, it's called Authentically You. And on our website, you could find a map of local groups that might be meeting in your church or around you that could be running one of those groups. And if there's nothing around you, we host online groups for all of those workbooks, a group that you can join, and you will be with the same 7 or 8 people for a 9 or 10 month group walking through a healing process. And many people who have nothing around them have found that to be a safe place to really dig in and start to find healing. So all of that is at puredesire.org. And I would mention too, we've got a new book, depending when you're listening, that's coming out or is now out. Ashley Jameson on our team and myself co-wrote a book that's kind of the Pure Desire primer, if you will, or the introduction to what is our methodology and why does it work. And that book is called Hope, Healing, and Freedom. And you can find that at puredesire.org or on Amazon or wherever you buy books. You should be able to find Hope, Healing, and Freedom. And that would be a great book if you're saying, man, I'm not in this place, but someone I know is. This is exactly the kind of book that you could give to them to start their healing journey today.
So great. Well, Nick, thanks for sharing all that. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today. Again, I could talk to you for a lot longer than an hour, but thank you for being with us.
So glad. Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. We're glad that you were with us today, and we look forward to seeing you in a future episode. Take care.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for the Love and Truth Network podcast. We hope that the stories and insights shared have ignited in you a sense of God's powerful love for you and given you encouragement for your own journey toward relational and sexual wholeness. Remember, transformation is absolutely possible when rooted in grace, truth, and authentic biblical community. Subscribe today, share with a friend, share with your pastor, and we look forward to seeing you in our next Love and Truth Network podcast.